Hello everybody, in this video I'll be showing you how I paint my Nurgle Rotbringer sorcerer. As usual, I start off with a base coat of Chaos Black to a rattle can. I then make a mixture of 2 parts yellow olive and 1 part dark brown, and I apply this all over the outside of the cape. Where needed, I apply a second coat to get the good coverage, and then I move on, making a mixture of 2 parts dark brown and 1 part dark flesh tone, and I apply this to the tunic of the model. Again, if needed, I apply 2 coats. I then make a mixture of 4 parts terracotta and 1 part dark brown, and I block the inside of the cape in with this. Once that's dry, I'm going to wash all the painted areas with Airbrush Earthshade, and this will get all the deepest recesses shaded. Once that's dry, I make a mixture of 4 parts yellow olive and 1 part dark brown, and I'm going to apply a first rough highlight to the outside of the cape. I stay away from the deepest recesses to keep the shading in place. Next I take pure yellow olive, and I'm going to repeat this process, just leaving little bits of the previous layer visible. And I'll start building up those highlights. Next I make a mixture of 4 parts yellow olive and 1 part gold grey. And following the same principle, I'm going to apply the next highlight, building up from the darker area towards the light, and again leaving little bits of the previous layer visible where possible. Next I add 1 part stonewall grey to this previous mixture, and I repeat the process. Just build up the color, if needed, in several coats. And then for a final highlight, I add 1 part dead white to the mixture, and on the most upper parts most towards the light, I apply a final thin highlight. Next I'm going to move on and paint the tunic of the model. I start off with a mixture of 4 parts dark brown and 3 parts dark flesh tone, and again staying away from the deepest recesses, I'm going to build up a basic highlight. And I make sure a lot of the darker areas are untouched. I then add 1 part Cori red to the mixture, and I'm going to start and build up the color, leaving little bits of the previous layer visible again, just working towards the light and the outer edges of the areas I'm painting. And then by adding 2 more parts Cori red to the mixture, I'm going to build up the color a bit more, get it a bit more red, and get the transition a little bit better towards the edges. Even though the Cori red is a pretty dark color, it will still make the whole tone a bit lighter, what works as a subtle highlight. Next I add 1 part cold gray to this mixture, and I again am going to build up the transition a bit more towards the light. And just as in all the previous steps, leave a little bit of the previous layer visible, and then by adding 1 part dead white to the mixture, I'm going to apply a last final edge highlight. Next I'm going to paint up the inside of the cave. I start off with using a mixture of 6 parts terracotta and 1 part dark brown. And I again leave the deepest recesses untouched and just build up this color. Next I add 1 part filthy brown to the mix, and I'm going to get this transition a little bit lighter. Again, weighted towards the light, mostly that's the outside of the model. For the next layer I'm going to add 1 more part filthy brown and repeat the process. Then I add 1 part bone white and I start strengthening the highlights, leaving a little bit of the previous layer visible again. And by adding another part of bone white, I repeat this process. For the final highlight on the inside of the cave, I add 1 part dead white and I apply a final highlight towards the parts where I think it looks best. At this point I felt the green was too bright on the most outer side, so I made a mixture of Antonian camo shade with some glaze medium to roughly this consistency, and I applied it all over the green parts. Might look a bit milky here, but that's the glaze medium that will go away when it's dry. So once it's dried, the green is a bit more, a bit less vibrant. Next I took dark flesh tone and I used this as a base for all the skin parts on the model. You can use a brown or whatever you want for this, it's just for the next color to go on a bit easier. I made a mixture of 2 parts dark flesh tone and 5 parts dead flesh, and I blocked in all the skin. Next I added 2 parts pale flesh to this picture, and I applied a rough highlight to all the skin tones. As long as you stay away from the deepest recesses, it's not very important to be super deep now. I then made a wash consisting of 1 part purple tone and 2 parts red tone, and I washed all the skin with it. now we have the shading for the skin in place. I then went back to the highlight layer, which now consists of 2 parts dark flesh tone, 5 parts dead flesh, and 2 parts pale flesh, and I highlight all the skin tones with it. Then I add 3 parts pale flesh to this mixture, and I start building up the highlights, getting a little bit of the transition in. And for the next layer I add 2 parts dead white to the mixture and repeat the process. I then add 4 more parts dead white to the mixture, and I apply this as a final highlight to the skin, so leaving the previous layers visible, and just build it up a bit more towards the light. Next I made a mixture of 1 part earth and 1 part khaki, and I blocked in the scrolls on the model. The important part is that the paint's on there now. Just make sure don't hit any already painted parts. This is then highlighted fairly roughly with khaki, pure khaki. At this stage I'm not really worried about getting a transition in or whatever, just get the khaki on there in a highlight manner. Also I paint the rope underneath his stomach and the maggots in the khaki color. I then use Airbrush Earthshade and I wash the parchment scrolls, and I also wash the little piece of rope with the Earthshade. Now we have a nice shaded rope there, and on the parchment the same thing goes. So then I use Seraphim Sepia and I'm going to carefully wash all the maggots with it. Next I went back to khaki and I highlighted the rope. And also I applied the highlights to the parchment scrolls. And as you can see, I did quite some large parts on the scrolls. I then used earth and I blocked in all the bone parts of the model. And this is then followed by a wash of Airbrush Earthshade. It's a little bit of a weird order. I should have just do the bone parts before I washed the other parts with Argus Sunshade, but this happened. Next I made a mixture of 1 part khaki and 2 parts bone white, and I used this mixture as a next highlight for the parchment. Again, building the color up, leaving a little bit of the previous khaki layer visible, just going upwards towards the light, and make sure on the front those little swirly thingies are highlighted as well. I then added 1 part dead white to this mixture, and I repeated the process, leaving bits of the previous layer visible, working towards the outside, towards the light. And for the final highlight on the parchment, I added 2 parts dead white to the mixture, and I continued building the highlight up. Next, using earth, I started highlighting all the bone parts on the model. And as you can guess by now, I stay away from the deepest recesses and just build that color up. Basically, I leave a little bit of the previous layer of earth before I apply the wash visible, then I build up from there. Next, I make a mixture of 1 part earth and 1 part bone white. To repeat this process and build up the color. And for the next layer I'm going to add 2 parts bone white to the mixture. And I'm going to strengthen the previous highlight. For the next stage I'm going to use pure bone white. And I'm going to apply this as the next highlight. Again, following all the same rules, leaving little bits of the previous highlight visible. And using nice and thin paints so that it doesn't get green, especially with these light colors. Next, for the final stage on the bone parts, I use a mixture of 1 part bone white and 1 part dead white. And I just reinforced the bone highlight. Next I was going to work on the wooden parts, and I started off by making a mixture of 4 parts charred brown and 1 part gold gray, and just block in the wooden stave the sorcerer has. I added 1 part earth and 1 part gold gray to this previous mixture, and I started applying highlight using very thin lines, and I started working on the graining in the wood as well. It doesn't have a whole lot of effect right now, but it will get into place. Next I added 2 parts gold gray to the mixture, and I repeated the previous layer basically, leaving small parts of it visible, just starting to work on those grains a bit more. and you don't need a whole lot of grains on an item like this because it's so small. A couple of them already will do the job. Next I add 2 parts bone white to the mixture, and I repeat this process. I constantly also keep in mind where the light is coming from, so that I'm not painting a really light green on the bottom or all the way on the inside of the model. Try and stay a bit on the front of the model, and the most outer parts of this wooden stick. And as a final stage to the wood, I add 2 parts dead white to the mixture. I'm going to reinforce some of the graining that I painted in before. I just do this on the most visible parts of the model. Next I went on and painted the slimy parts on the top of the wooden ball stick thing. I started off with camouflage green and just to block this all this slime in. Took a couple of coats to get good coverage. Then using autumn green, I'm going to apply a really rough highlight to all these slimy parts. Just stayed away from the deepest recesses basically and try to paint all the other parts in with this color. Next I made a mixture of 2 parts autumn green and 1 part moon yellow, and I started highlighting, working on the light transition, just building the colors up a bit. I then added 2 parts moon yellow to the mixture, and I reinforced this previous highlight. I then added 2 parts dead white to the mixture, and I applied this as a final highlight to the slimy parts. There were like a couple of pouches and 1 shoe on his left foot visible, left to paint. So I blocked these in with charred brown, and I then applied a highlight of 1 part charred brown and 1 part earth to these parts. Then I used a wash of aqua shade. Just made sure I didn't hit any other parts with it. And I went back to the 1 part charred brown and 1 part earth mixture, and I applied a next highlight after the wash was dry, obviously. And then I applied a final highlight using pure earth. So once this final layer has been applied, I give the model a dull coat. I always use Testor's dull coat. And once that was fully dried, I used some Tamiya clear to go over the slimy parts to give it a nice glossy and liquid-like effect. And that finished up the painting part of this painting process of this model. I applied some tufts and here's the end result. So I hope you liked this video. Please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment if you want to. Dislike as well if you didn't like the video, but please be kind enough to let me know what's not good about it so I can improve on that part. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye bye.